Hi guys, Craig here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the 2018 Watts family murders that shook Colorado. The Watts family was the perfect little family by anyone's standards. A husband and wife in a loving relationship. 2 daughters and another kid on the way. But suddenly, things took a turn for the gruesome worst. Even the officer who investigated their case would eventually leave his job due to PTSD. Before we get into the details, make sure that you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon for notifications. So let's begin. On August 13th, 2018, Shannon Waltz, a 34-year-old mother of 2, returned to her home in Frederick, Colorado at 1:48 a.m. after a weekend away at company training. Her friend and neighbour Nicole Atkins dropped Shannon off because Shannon told her that she wasn't feeling very well and that she had a doctor's appointment the following morning. Shannon, who was 15 weeks pregnant at this time. The next morning, Nicole was waiting for Shannon to tell her what had happened at the doctor's, but she never received a text back. This alerted Nicole because Shannon was someone who overshared everything, and she instantly felt like something was off. So acting fast, Nicole didn't leave it to just having an inkling. She went to figure out what was going on. She drove up to Shannon's house at around 12 p.m. and saw that her car was parked in the garage. She walked up to ring the doorbell and saw that she and the kid's shoes were right next to the door. She seemed to be home, but Shannon wasn't answering the door, and her phone was turned off. This made Nicole's "something isn't right" radar go off. After waiting a little while, she called Shannon's husband, 33-year-old Chris Watts. Chris worked very early shifts, so Nicole knew that he wouldn't be home. On the phone, she told him how she hadn't heard from Shannon since she dropped her off at 2 a.m, and that she was concerned because her car and shoes were still at home. She told Chris that if she didn't hear from Shannon soon, she was calling the cops to come and help. Right after, she did indeed call the Frederick Police Department. So about an hour after Nicole got to the scene, Officer Scott Conroy came by the house to conduct a welfare check. When he got there, he knocked on all the doors and the windows, but didn't hear anything. Nicole told him that Shannon was pregnant, had lupus, and was also suffering from diabetes. So getting to her was critical. This is when Officer Conroy talked to her husband Chris Watts on the phone. At this point, he tells Chris about the car and the shoes and how they were worried that something had happened to Shannon, and they were concerned that she might be in need of immediate help. But he can't enter someone's house without the owner's permission. At this point, Chris tells the officer to wait for him as he's on his way home. The officer found it weird that he had to be asked to wait outside, but he waited anyway. Once Chris got home, he greeted the officer and opened the garage door to enter from the back door. He did stop to look through Shannon's car first, and he was gone for a whole minute and a half before he opened the front door to let the cop and Nicole into the house. He gave the officer permission to enter, and they were finally able to look through the house. They found the house perfectly clean. Nothing was out of place. And Chris found Shannon's phone out of battery. He says that he was going to plug it into the charger and says that once he turns it on, it's about to blow up, because he's been texting her to find her all morning. Chris then tells the cops how both of his daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, who the family called Cece, aren't home either, and their blankies, which they never leave home without, are also gone. A few minutes later, he also finds Shannon's wedding ring on her nightstand. Chris says that the only time that she takes it off is to colour her hair. And Shannon had even left the family dog home alone. All of this was extremely out of character for Shannon. Chris also told the officers that he and Shannon were separated and about to file for divorce. It seems like she had just taken the kids and gone, but that seemed unlike Shannon. She wasn't one to just up and run. But then, where was she? Chris and Shannon met on Facebook in 2010. She was going through several health complications at this time and felt like she was at her lowest when Chris added her on Facebook. At first, Shannon thought it would be just another Facebook friendship, but the two seemingly hit it off and eventually ended up meeting in real life. They dated for 2 years, and on November 3rd, 2012, the two got married in North Carolina. Shannon described Chris as the best man that God could have sent her. So Shannon worked for a multi-level marketing company called Layvale. With companies like this, you pretty much have to advertise at all times. And Shannon did that through Facebook. She constantly uploaded videos online that showed how perfect her family is, maybe to inspire others to work in the same company as her. Shannon and Chris welcomed their first daughter, Bella Marie Watts, a little over a year after their wedding, on December 17th, 2013, and their second daughter, Celeste Catherine Watts, on July 17th, 2015. Both times, Shannon talked about how grateful she was to be able to be a mother, because of her battle with lupus, which led her to think that she would never be able to have her own children. People that knew both Shannon and Chris described Shannon as someone who was assertive and even bossy, while describing Chris as someone who was somber, more chilled. But hey, I guess opposites attract, right? Shannon and Chris were the perfect couple. They were always hugging and kissing, and they seemed as happy as they could be. Shannon's Facebook posts showed how they celebrated every waking moment that they got to spend together. But all this seemed a little bit too perfect. Maybe too good to be true? When Officer Scott Conroy first arrived at the house, he and Chris went to talk to the neighbour to see if they had heard anything suspicious that morning. Their next door neighbour had a security camera at his front door, which was set to record every time there was a movement in the area. That movement included Chris's truck pulling in and out of his driveway. So the neighbours showed them the footage that showed Chris leaving for work at 5 AM. But instead of just driving away, Chris was seen loading something into his car. A very fidgety Chris then explained that he was loading his tools into his car and says that it was a regular part of his job. Officer Scott then told Chris to go ahead and that he would catch him up. As soon as he left, the neighbour then told the officer that Chris was not acting like his usual self, saying that he was usually very relaxed and not flustered, like he was, and like he was trying to over-explain his actions. But the officer told him that this may just be a reaction to trying to process the fact that his entire family is missing and might be in danger. This is when the neighbour also says that he heard the couple arguing very loudly as well, adding to the suspicion that something might have been wrong. But all couples argue sometimes, it doesn't usually mean much. So the next morning, on August 14th, Chris did an interview with the 9 o'clock news, and he was seemingly detached from the situation, even laughing at times. But he also says that not having his family at home was earth-shattering for him, so it was a little bit of a contradiction. That night, Chris was brought in for an interview to help figure out what could have happened. He starts by telling the interrogator, FBI agent Graham Coder, that he and Shannon were separated and were about to file for divorce. When Agent Coder brought up the fact that he had seen Chris's photos from a few years ago and seeing him now, he can tell that he's lost a lot of weight. He then added that guys who do this often end up cheating on their wives, but Chris denied that he had ever cheated on his wife throughout the entire interview. They spent about 2 hours in the interview room, with Agent Coder asking very difficult questions head on, asking Chris from every angle if he had something to do with the disappearance of his entire family, or if he knew where they were now. But Chris kept deflecting, rambling on about random things like the type of dresses his daughters liked. But there was one key detail that stood out. Chris kept on saying those girls instead of my girls or my daughters, and he kept referring to them in the past tense, as if he was sure they were never coming back. At this point, Agent Coder told him there's a room full of police officers that believe he is behind the disappearance, and from the interview he's got nothing to prove that he didn't. He then asked Chris if he would be willing to come back in the morning for a polygraph test to prove that he isn't lying. Chris agreed, and he did indeed come back the next morning. The polygrapher, CBI agent Tammy Lee, prepared him for the test. She told him that she was an expert and had gotten her training from the best institutes. She is the best one there to prove if he is innocent, if he actually is. She even told him that she's glad he showed up, because if he did have something to do with it, it would be very stupid of him to take the test. She'd done this to add on the pressure. Ironically, Chris ended up failing his pre-test, and Agent Lee told him in a joking tone that he was a terrible liar, and says that it's a good thing because it shows that he knows the difference between what's right and what is wrong. She begins the actual test by saying, "Right, now only one person knows the truth, but in just a few minutes, both of us will." She asked him over and over again if he caused the disappearance of his family, but he said no every time, and he was lying every time. After the interview ended, Agent Lee came back into the room with Agent Coder and told him that he had failed the test. She didn't even let him deny it and told him that she knew and he knew that he was lying, and that there was no point in refuting the results. He needed to tell the truth and tell it to them now. They even threw in the fact that they knew that he'd been having an affair with his co-worker, but didn't even feel like mentioning her because they knew that she had nothing to do with the disappearance, letting Chris know that he had been caught out on all of the lies that he had told so far. At first, Chris tried to act like he didn't understand what was happening, but eventually even he knew that the jig was up. In a last attempt to deflect the blame, with his father in the room, he told detectives that Shannon had killed his daughters, and when he found out, he totally raged out and killed her. The agents don't buy it. They asked him why he didn't call the ambulances when he saw that his daughters were dead. Why did he get rid of their bodies along with Shannon's? It just didn't make sense. But he kept saying that he only killed Shannon, not his daughters. It wasn't until 2 months later that he actually confessed to killing his daughters as well. After confessing, Chris walked the agents through everything that happened on the morning of August 13th, 2018. Shannon had come back from her work trip at 2 in the morning. A half hour later, the couple had sex and then fell asleep. At 4:30 a.m, Chris woke up to get ready for work. He says it was at this point that he woke Shannon up to have a conversation. The conversation started off with him asking Shannon if she was willing to uproot her entire life and move to a different state. But immediately, Shannon started crying. He says that she knew that he was having an affair. He says that he didn't know what came over him, but he strangled her and put his hands around her neck and killed her. In letters written from jail, he even goes as far as to say that he smothered the girls with their pillows before he even woke Shannon up. But something happened and they didn't die. Instead, they woke up with bruises on their eyes. And Bella walked up into his room just after he had killed Shannon and asked what had happened to her mother. Chris then told her that she wasn't feeling well and needed to go to the hospital. He then at this point took the bedsheet off the bed and wrapped Shannon's body in it. He even added trash bags on her head and her legs so that the girls wouldn't recognise their mother in the truck. He put Shannon on the floor and the girls sat on the bench with their feet dangling on top of their mother's lifeless body. He then drove them 45 minutes away to an oil field. Once he was there, he dragged Shannon out of the car and dug her a shallow grave and then threw her in. In a letter, he talked about how she ended up landing face first, which caused her to partially give birth to their dead unborn son, who was going to be called Nico. Chris says that she landed face down, and I remember being so angry with her that I wasn't going to change how she landed. So he just covered up the grave and tossed the bedsheet to one side and then went back to the truck. In the truck, he first went for Cece. She had a Yankees blanket in her hand. He took it off her and put it over her head, smothering her for real this time, while her sister Bella watched her die. Chris then picked up Cece's body and carried it up the stairs to the 30-foot crude oil tank, opening the hatch and dropping her body in before going back to the truck to do the same thing to Bella. When he got there, Bella asked him if the same thing that happened to Cece was going to happen to her. Her last words while she was being smothered were, "Daddy, no." When Bella had died, he took her body and dropped it into the second tank. But one of the most chilling parts of this is that the holes were only 8 inches wide. What 3 or 4-year-old is only 8 inches wide? Chris claimed that he didn't struggle to drop them in, saying that it was easy to let them go. I even heard the splash when they hit the oil. When the police discovered their bodies on August 16th, 3 days after they were dumped in the hot oil, their bodies had already decomposed a lot. While getting them out, they were so soaked in oil, their skin was slippery, and one of them ended up being degloved while being retrieved, although the skin was recovered a little while after. Their bodies were so badly deformed that they couldn't even be identified at the scene. The oil had taken over their entire bodies, and they couldn't even be flown back to their grandparents in North Carolina together because they were a massive fire hazard, so they had to be flown separately. The girls also had to be buried instead of being cremated because their bodies were basically like a ticking time bomb because of the amount of contact they had with the oil. Everyone on the crime scene suffered with horrible flashbacks of seeing all of this happen. The lead detective gets triggered anytime he sees a little girl and had to quit his job because he just couldn't go on anymore. And Agent Tammy Lee has spoken out about the fact that she keeps breaking down. Because she's seen so many of their videos, she's heard their voices, and it seems like she knew them and that she was mourning the loss also. The worst part is that Chris couldn't even tell police if he had a motive. He just says that he woke up and knew that it was something he had to do, and that he physically couldn't stop himself. On November 19th, 2018, 4 months after the gruesome murders of Shannon Waltz and her 2 daughters and unborn son, Chris received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He was also sentenced to 48 years for ending an unlawful pregnancy, and 36 years for tampering with dead bodies. Chris Watts was initially held in Wales County Jail in Colorado, but the other inmates who knew what he had done kept yelling at him different ways he could kill himself. And they also says that if they ever got their hands on him, they would do it for him. He had to be moved for his own safety and is now serving a life sentence in Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Chris Watts has confessed that every time he closes his eyes, he hears his daughter Bella's voice saying, "Daddy, no." So guys, that was our glimpse into the Chris Watts case. What do you guys think should have been his punishment for these gruesome murders? Let me know in the comment section below. Make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye.